The subconscious aspects of your mind have hypnotic control over you. In other words, everything that's in your subconscious has the same effect on you as a post-hypnotic suggestion. So if you have in your subconscious, I'm an idiot, that's it, you're an idiot. You're going to go around saying, I'm an idiot. And until you delete that command or instruction, that's what's going to prevail. So this is about mental deletion. Because the mind is an electromagnetic phenomenon, you can delete portions of it, just as you can delete any other electromagnetic phenomenon. To me, as a human development engineer, there is nothing vague about this. This is very real and very specific, and I've used it successfully for 40 years. For those of you who don't know who I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena which greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I have constructed a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics, and published it in the book Septimics, Hierarchies of Human Phenomena. Today we're going to discuss some of the content of that book. This is the scale of mental deletion. Most of what's in this scale will be news to people. So let me be very clear about what these various things mean. Now, mental is the adjectival form of the word mind. What is the mind? This is something that has been the subject of vagueness for 6,000 years. So I'm going to tell you precisely what it is. The mind is an electromagnetic field matrix generated by a spiritual being and intermediates between the being and the neural system of the body. There is the conscious and the subconscious. The conscious parts of your mind are the ones of which you are aware. The subconscious are those of which you are unaware. Now, the subconscious aspects of your mind have hypnotic control over you. In other words, everything that's in your subconscious has the same effect on you as a post-hypnotic suggestion. So if you have in your subconscious, I'm an idiot, that's it, you're an idiot. You're going to go around saying, I'm an idiot. And until you delete that command or instruction, that's what's going to prevail. So this is about mental deletion. Because the mind is an electromagnetic phenomenon, you can delete portions of it, just as you can delete any other electromagnetic phenomenon. To me, as a human development engineer, there is nothing vague about this. This is very real and very specific, and I've used it successfully for 40 years. This is the scale of mental deletion. In other words, if you are deleting matter from the subconscious, it can occur at any one of these 7 levels. If you have an unwanted condition in your life, it nearly always comes from the subconscious. Mental health professionals opine that 95% of motivation comes from the subconscious. I don't know where that number comes from, but I won't argue with it. But I think they're in the ballpark with that figure. So what I have been doing as a human development engineer for many decades is finding the content that is in the person's subconscious. And when the person himself sees it, it's no longer subconscious, because he's conscious of it. You have, in effect, deleted it from the subconscious by making him conscious of it. Because once you are conscious of it, it has no command value over it. In other words, the power of the subconscious is inherent in the fact that the content of the subconscious is something of which you are not aware. So by guiding the person to becoming aware of it, it's no longer subconscious, and it no longer has this hypnotic control over him. So you can have a dramatic change in a person instantaneously when he spots that. And the moment when he spots it, it deletes from the subconscious. And he will have a realization. And that is how I know we succeed. He'll say, oh, now I see what the problem is with my father. He reminds me of Hitler, or whatever realization the person has. And when the person has that, he'll be very happy with it. And his relationship with his father just improved. It may not change his father's behavior at all, but it will change how he views the father, how he interacts with him. And that could mean several things. It could mean when he deals with him, he knows this phenomenon is there. so he can tiptoe around it, or he can just say, I'm not going to deal with this guy anymore. But that's up to the client. That's not my business. So, any questions so far?
There are a lot of comparisons with Jung's work, Carl Jung's work. But I find the scale of mental deletion to be a fascinating conceptualization of how we can process and release traumatic memories and energies held within the unconscious mind. It does
Right.
remind me of the Jungian notion of encountering the shadow, those aspects of ourselves and our experiences that we've either rejected or repressed into the unconscious. I think by courageously re-engaging with the trauma and re-experiencing all the difficult feelings, we integrate it and remove its unconscious hold over us. That outlines 7 levels or methods for deleting harmful mental energy and traumatic imprints within the unconscious mind. And it seems to me that progressing up the levels allows faster deletion, evolving from laborious reliving to sovereign acts of will and intention.
Exactly. Let's look at the type. This is a linear scale, meaning it's not a spiral scale. In a spiral scale, there's an apparent congruence between levels 1 and 7. That does not apply here. This is a gradual scale, meaning there's an infinitude of gradations between each of the levels. You do not jump instantaneously from one level to the next. It is gradual. And it is a general scale, which means that a person has a general level on this scale. It's not context driven. Now, let me further clarify that by saying in actual practice, what you get is a moving bracket. So you'll have a person, let's say he's at level 6. Okay, he might suddenly have an experience where he's at level 5, and then he goes back to level 6. So it's a bracket. And if he continues, the bracket will move up to where then at some point he'll experience it at level 4, and then he might retreat to level 5. At any given point in time, the person is at a specific level. Because of the variety of content in the subconscious, the level will shift. Generally, it's an upward shift. Having a lifetime of working with this, it takes a lifetime to go from level 7 to level 1. The vast 99.9% of people don't even have a concept of what level 1 is, but you get there gradiently. Once you get to level 2, then level 1 will become real to you. And that is true for all of these. You'll be at level 4, and then you'll realize that you can operate at level 3, and then level 3 will become real to you, and you start operating at level 3, and eventually you'll move to level 2, even though occasionally you'll operate at level 3. Of course, in the subconscious, there is a variety of content. If you have an incident where you are beaten into unconsciousness by a gang of thugs, that's a serious traumatic incident. And so that might require you to address it at a lower level than you would address an incident in which you were insulted by your father. Being insulted by your father is mildly traumatic, as opposed to being beaten up by a gang of thugs is seriously traumatic. So that is why there is this moving bracket. But generally, when I'm working with clients, is that I assume the person is going to start at 7, and in a period of time, he'll go to 6 and then 5. And as he continues, he will move up the scale. Let's talk about level 7, re-experiencing. Now, this is defined as re-experiencing an incident repeatedly if necessary. So you go to a therapist. He says, I understand you were in an automobile accident. Yes, I was. Tell me about it. And you tell him. As you tell him, to some degree, you're re-experiencing it. You might get twinges of pain, you might get terror, you might get fear, you might get any of the components of that incident. You re-experience it. It's unpleasant. And you might have to re-experience it more than once. Very often, especially when you have a serious traumatic incident, you have to re-experience it more than once. So in other words, there's a first pass through it. And it is reduced somewhat, but it's not completely gone. It's not deleted. You would then do it again. After you discuss this a few different times with your therapist, you might say, I don't care about this anymore. I'm not interested in it, meaning it's no longer a trauma to you. You can see, if you talk to people, people will often talk about dire incidents with amusement. I remember when they sawed my leg off because it was gangrenous and there was this pile of legs from all the legs that had been cut off. I thought about all the damage that was going to be done to the shoe industry from all those people not buying shoes because they only have one. That's what you get from a person who has erased the incident. In other words, you'll have a guy, he comes in, he's heartbroken because his wife left him. This is a traumatic incident. And after a while, he's laughing about it. He said, yeah, I got rid of that broad. She was a pain in the ass. He doesn't care about it anymore. It's jocular to him. That's one of the ways you know it's been erased.
Its charge is dissipated.
That's right. The actual electromagnetic force associated with it has been deleted. That's actually what you delete him. You go from a point where the person is not conscious of it at all, then you get him to start recounting it, and he starts to become conscious of it. And then when he becomes completely conscious of it, the force connected with it is deleted. Because remember, he's creating that force. The being, the spiritual being, creates that energy. And this is the whole idea of resolving your karma. This is what resolving your karma on a physics level is. Deleting the actual electromagnetic force connected with these incidents. So let's say you have a guy who murdered his wife. This is a terrible trauma. He's very upset about it. He's guilty and everything else. At some point, he can delete the charge from it. He lets go of it, and he's no longer carrying this with him. This is what the Hindus are talking about when they say you carry your karma with you from lifetime to lifetime. You have these incidents, and you are actually creating these electromagnetic fields in this matrix as a being. So that is why it carries from lifetime to lifetime.
This reminds me of what Jung called reliving of the unlived, where the reunion of the individual with the unlived portion of their life, so that enlightenment or psychological growth doesn't come from focusing on positive thoughts and avoiding the difficult darkness within us. Growth requires consciously engaging with and making the unconscious traumas and painful experiences conscious, as distinct from repressing them. This whole thing in the spiritual industry is about positive thoughts and positivity. I see that as more a spiritual bypass. You don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light. It's by making the darkness conscious. That's what I'm getting from level 7.
And that's true for the whole scale. It's just that it happens easier and faster at higher levels. I want to speak briefly to what you just said. This scale and this concept of the scale is revolutionary for most people because everybody knows about education. They say, oh, yeah, that's the problem. People need to be educated. I agree with that. I went to school for 28 years and I loved education. In education, you're adding data. This is how you do calculus. This is how you balance a chemical equation. This is how you give a speech to a large crowd, et cetera, et cetera. You're learning. You're adding data. In mental deletion, you are deleting data. This is what happens to me every day of my life when I meditate. I delete things. Now, here's what you have to realize that's not stated in the scale, although it might be stated in the text. I'd have to read it again. There is always some portion of the subconscious that is available to the person. It may not be the one he is interested in. It may not be the one that he wants to address, but there is some portion of it. So, for example, a guy will come in to me with, let's say, he's got a bad marriage, he doesn't know what to do about it, he can't resolve it. So then I interview him and I see the biofeedback. And I see in biofeedback when he says mother, the meter explodes. Kaboom! So I'm going to take up mother because that explosion on the meter is actual electromagnetic charge that the meter is running into associated with the word mother.
Can you elaborate on that, Jim, for the audience in terms of how those electromagnetic waves can be measured by an OHM meter, as you stated in your book?
Basically, the fact is that every time a person thinks a thought, the electromagnetic fields around the body changes, okay? And it shows up in the resistance. So you use an ordinary ohm meter, and you will see if you connect the person to the ohm meter, that as he thinks different thoughts, the resistance of his body changes. More significantly, it changes in specific ways. In other words, there are specific categories of content that have specific manifestations that you can isolate on the meter. For example, if a person is upset, that shows in one way. If a person is angry, that shows in another way. If a person is tired of something, meaning he's done too much of it, that shows up in another way. So there are different categories. Not only do I get the data from the person, then I get the data from the meter, and that tells me what's going on here. So if the meter starts doing a particular thing when he discusses something, I know what the substance of it is. Then I will inquire into that, and he'll say, as a matter of fact, yes, how did you know that? You may recall that I described my practices using Socratic dialogue aided by biofeedback. Socratic dialogue, the essence of it is asking the right question. You're guiding the person to a realization, not by telling him anything, but by getting him to figure it out himself. And you use the meter, the biofeedback, to do that. The guy comes in and he mentions mother. There's a big reaction on the meter. This guy might say, why are you asking about my mother? My problem with my relationship with my wife stems from previous traumas with my mother. So we wind up getting to the same thing anyway, but he did not know that. So the biofeedback actually opened the door to getting to the underlying cause of the problem with his wife. So when he has that epiphany, he says, oh, I see. Now let's deal with my mother. And then we get in hammer and tongs into mother and really address that. So there's often quite a bit of surprise with the client. In other words, if the client knew what was wrong with him, it wouldn't be wrong with him. So when he finds out what's wrong with him, it's not wrong with him anymore. That's how it works.
Are there any particular challenges someone may face when trying to re-experience and process a memory, whether it's traumatic or repeatedly, until it loses its charge?
Oh, sure. I've had an entire career of dealing with those problems. Sometimes you'll have to deal with a half a dozen other issues before the issue that he's interested in is accessible. Because remember I said some part of the mind, of the subconscious, is always accessible. And the biofeedback points you toward that. So you go with the biofeedback. The guy says, I didn't really come here to discuss my mother. I know that, but we have a big reaction here. What went on with your mother? And you get him to tell you about it. There might be a half a dozen different things like that before you even get to having the meter react on his wife. You might say, tell me about your wife, and the meter does not react. What that means is there is so much electromagnetic force, or what I would call electromagnetic standing waves in his subconscious. It is too much for him to see it at all. In other words, it's repressed. So you can't get to that. Very often you'll have a person doing this for years and years, and he finally gets to 5 years later, oh, I see what went on with my second grade teacher. It comes off in layers because every time you delete something, the next thing down is available. This scale is basically saying that as you proceed in this process, the way in which you can assess it, address it, changes. So let's go to level 6.
One more question about level
Yes.
7. In your experience as a human development engineer, how can someone build perseverance? Because I understand from reading this particular chapter, it can take many hours, hundreds of hours, required to keep re-experiencing painful memories until deletion occurs at the rudimentary level.
Let me put it this way. You take up something, and at some point in the session, the guy will delete it and have a realization. So, oh, now I see what was going on with my cousin. See, when he has that, he's buoyed by this. He's happy. He's ebullient. He's raring to go for the next one. Hey, that was cool. Let's do the next one, you see? Just like anything else, you get acclimated to it. It's not slogging through some incredible, difficult, miserable experience. You take up something very specific. The meter tells me what it is. The guy looks at it. You might be on it 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour. He has a realization. The meter tells me that because there's a meter manifestation that tells me that the deletion just occurred. And I say, okay, good, let's move on to the next thing. He's going to be happy with that because, as I said, when you delete something, you're done with it. You don't care anymore. So he comes in, he's upset about his girlfriend, Gertrude. Oh, yeah, we had a bad relationship. And somebody said, Oh, yeah, now I see what happened with her. He doesn't care about her anymore. He can just talk about her. There's no stress connected with it. See? Then you go on to something else. The reason that the person gets to the next level is he has freed his mind so much that he can operate at a higher level. So you can get somebody come in, he'll run like a few incidents at level 7, and he's had all this gain from running it or from experiencing it, that he will start running at level 6. I know this. I'm ahead of the guy. I'm already watching him. I know if I'm running a guy at level 4, I'm not telling him this, but I'm looking for him to start manifesting at level 3. So level 4 is, just to give you an example, by looking at it. You delete something by looking at it. About your grandfather. So in his mind, he's looking at it and it just deletes whatever it is. It's gone. That's it. Now, if a person does that a few times, I'm getting ready for him to say to me, I say, your grandmother upset you. Oh, yeah, lots of times. Oh, see, now I'm at number 3. How many times did she upset you? And look at it and say, 43 times. Boom, it erases or deletes. Now we're running at level 3. He may not be able to continue to run at level 3, but he will tell me when he's ready, because he'll say, how many times do you have an incident when you were afraid of a dog? 18 incidents. Okay, that's number 3. He just told me how many there were. And that might just be enough to say, poof. Now, if a guy's running at a lower level, I wouldn't be asking him how many incidents there were. I do not ask a person how many there are until he's already operating at level 4. So this guy can just look at it and goes, poof. See, that's somebody who's running at a much higher level than the normal person would be able to. Because as I said, everybody starts at level 7. So when they're running at level 7, I'm alert to how long do we have to run at this? Oh, now we're able to do it by recounting. So let me tell you what recounting is. Recounting is not re-experiencing, it's recounting several similar or related instances separately. Did your father insult you? Yes. Tell me about it. Okay. Was there another time your father insulted you? Yes. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Was there another? Now, actually, in practice, I would try to go earlier. I would say, was there an earlier time your father insulted you? Yes, 11. See, because that way you're getting the guy back to the things that are still buried that he hasn't gotten to yet. As a matter of fact, yes, I remember when I was 11, he insulted me. I was very upset. All right. Was there an earlier time your father insulted you? You'll get down to something at, let's say, age 4. I had forgotten all about that. Yeah, I can remember. I've cried and everything. Then he says, this is good. I'm done with this.
So this unearths the typical patterns and origins that are encoded via upbringing. As recounting these examples, is there a rising realization that indicates deletion or reduction has occurred?
Oh, yes, it's crystal clear. First of all, the guy has a realization. The guy's introverted, right? Because that's what this is about. When you are looking at the subconscious, you're introverted necessarily. So you're saying, tell me about this terrible experience you had with Gertrude, right? So he's thinking about Gertrude. And then all of a sudden, he will stop being introverted. He will look at you. He becomes extroverted. He says, Gertrude really reminds me of the nuns who taught me in school. He has a realization, and the meter will confirm this. He'll be happy about it. He'll have a realization about it. He becomes extroverted. This is not subtle if you know what you're looking for.
Something Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. If I expand on this, the unconscious patterns, complexes, and traumatic imprints that we've repressed continue to exert influence over our behaviors and emotions unconsciously, manifesting seemingly as inexplicable fate. So
That's right.
it tells me that when we bring these to consciousness, that enables and empowers us to rewrite the unconscious script.
That's right. So you have a guy can't have a relationship with a woman, right? Can't do it. So you start taking this up and you talk about Mary and Emily and Alice. And then the next thing you know, the guy meets a girl and he's dating this girl. And he comes and says, I met this girl, Donna, and she's really nice and we're dating now. Oh, good. Now, I'm not going to say to him, you're welcome. It was my work that did it, because people don't usually make that connection. But that's how it works. So you have a guy, and very often the phenomena seems to be completely disrelated. I'll give you an example of myself, because I've done a lot of this in my life. I was doing a very heavy type of re-experiencing. I suddenly realized I know how to dance the average jig. I had never danced the average jig in my life. And I just started dancing the average jig, and it was perfect. Where did that come from? Something went away. This works so well that the person often doesn't even connect it. I'll give you another example from my own life. There was a period when I was a young man when I had a lot of beautiful girlfriends living in Hollywood. My buddies would always come to me and ask for advice about women. I wasn't interested in advising my friends, but they would come to me. And so I would help them because they were my friends. This went on for long enough that I wondered why all these guys have trouble with women. I never had trouble with women. Then I said, wait a minute, that's not true. I used to have a lot of trouble with women. I completely forgot. Whatever it was in my subconscious that caused me to have trouble with women was deleted. So now I did not even make the connection. I suddenly realized many years ago, I had the same problems these guys are having, but I got rid of it because of the processing of these issues that I had done. And so very often things just go away without the person even being aware of it. That is why you can move the person up the scale. Nobody comes into me saying, I want to be able to erase by observation. That has never happened. But he gets there. He starts out, he's got to go through this thing sloggingly. Okay, tell me what happened. What happened next? What did you see there? You're re-experiencing. It's unpleasant. Now, a year later, this guy's up at level 4 and he just looks at it and goes, poof. How did that happen? You deleted enough stuff. His mental capabilities have improved. And that is where the scale comes from. Watching people and seeing how they move their abilities. Now, I'll take a guy and I'll start him out at 7, and so many 100 hours later, he's up doing level 3. But you have to realize that the benefit at the higher levels is geometrically better than the benefit at the lower levels. It's not arithmetic, it's geometric. As an obvious example, if you look at enumeration by counting how many, you say to the guy, how many times did your grandfather yell at you? He thinks about it. He says 72 times. Poof, he has a realization. We're done with that. Now, you realize that instead of recounting each of these 72 incidents, you got rid of them in 15 seconds because he's able to do it by enumeration. So again, as with the rest of these skills, these are all naturally occurring things that I just observed and wrote down. This is the way it progresses. So after recounting, you go up to automaticity. Automaticity means an avalanche of several similar or related instances. So you're running something. The guy says, oh, yeah, I can see there's all these times when my mother yelled at me. It's like an avalanche, all these incidents falling down on me. See, it's like all this stuff in his subconscious is unleashed on him. So, in other words, it's automatic. He does not have to recount it. And then that whole area of interest will be resolved. Guy says, I don't have a problem with my mother anymore. Just went away. I had all this stuff that appeared and just went to zip and it's gone. That's automaticity. So again, I would be watching for that, paying attention, where the guy is at the level of recounting, but all of a sudden he'll be saying, yeah, it's like an avalanche or some other word, a whole bunch of stuff falling on me all at once. Tell me about it, and then it all goes away. So that's automaticity. Instead of recounting them one by one, you got rid of them. Now, it's a little more efficient than recounting. Now, the next one is observation, which is deleting by observing it. He looks at it. You say, was your father belittling you? And he says, yes. And that's it. He just deleted it right there. In other words, he becomes extroverted. He's happy. He has a realization. The meter corresponds to that. He just did it by looking at it. That's all he had to do was look at it. He just looked at it and went poof. Because remember, the way this works is it's subconscious. As soon as it becomes conscious, you can see it. You have deleted something from the subconscious by definition. So when he looks at it, it deletes. But that just takes some ability that most people don't start out with. Then above that, you have enumeration, where a person can do this doing bunches of things at once. Once a person is getting rid of things by observation, then I'm alert to using enumeration. I'll say to the guy, well, he had a fist fight with one of the kids on the street. The guy says, oh yeah, 27 times. There is power in that. In order to give you that number, he had to be able to see those 27 incidents. But because he's got the power of erasing things by observation, he goes like a machine gun.
The very act of containing and categorizing allows for metabolization.
Right.
Because if you can consciously delineate, enumerate, and circumscribe the constituent elements or the fragments or parts related, say, to a core wounding or complex or unconscious pattern, then that allows the act of containment and categorization. Would that be right at this level?
Yes. Yes. So you see, I would never ask how many times unless I knew that person was operating at level 4 already. He looks at it, it goes poof. He looks at it, it goes poof. This guy is erasing things by observation. Okay, now I look for an opportunity to bring in enumeration. See? So he tells me something. I got in lots of fistfights when I was a young man. Oh, really? How many? He never thought about that. The fact that he can give you a number tells you he looked at it. He observed it, which is level 4. And he tells you there were 11 such incidents. The meter tells you right away, you're at the end, and he'll have a realization. Now, sometimes you may have to ask the person for the realization. You might say, did anything happen while we were looking at this? Oh, yeah, I realized that. Sometimes he doesn't voice it gratuitously. But again, the meter will tell you, then you can ask. But you have to be very careful. Sometimes the guy says, no, nothing happened. Okay, fine, you just go on with it. Then above enumeration is location. This is deleting by finding. I wonder if there was an incident when bobbity bob happens and he looks at it and he finds it, poof, it's gone. You're done. He has realization just by finding it. He did not even have to observe it. This is a point where the deletion is so rapid that the guy does not even see the trauma. He just says, oh, yeah, that did happen.
So in a sense, the deletion at that level, by locating or glimpsing the existence of an unconscious psychic pattern without fully knowing its content, there's a symbolic grasping and brushing up against its existence, which is enough to collapse its charge.
Yes.
How does this deletion at this level differ from observation at level 4, where the content is perceived?
Yeah, at 4, you actually see the thing. If a person is deleting by locating, he doesn't even see the thing. He doesn't even know what it was. He doesn't know when it was, where it was, who it was. He just looks that way, poof, okay, done.
Done. Yeah.
So this is somebody who's been doing this for a long time and has gotten very good at it. And it has a mental facility, a discerning mental facility to know what's going on in his mind. See, most people don't have a clue what's going on in their minds. They're at the effect of their minds. In fact, most people think they are their minds. And you can see this in all kinds of literature. There's a tremendous amount of vagueness where they got the mind confused with the soul and all kinds of stuff like that. This is what you get from people who are at level 7. As you get higher and higher, these things become very distinct. There become a point where you can see your mind the same way you can see a vase on a table, or the same way you can see a tulip in a garden. It's there. It's not me. In other words, you can perceive this electromagnetic matrix. Now, obviously, you can't do that with your eyeballs, but you can do it with your mind. If you elevate your consciousness, you can see your own mind. Because remember, you are not your mind. Your mind is an electromagnetic field matrix. Once you know you're creating it, it's very easy for you to just look at it and it goes poof, because you're not it. The final level is will. You delete things by will. In other words, you just decide and it goes away. And I'll give you an example. I had a friend who was a smoker. This guy was a very smart, enlightened person, very upscale person. Smoking stuck out as being anomalous. One day he shows up at my apartment and says, you know what? I quit smoking. Really? How'd that happen? He said, I just decided I'm a non-smoker. He was very happy about that. He just stopped smoking, just like that. Now, when you think about Billions of dollars have been spent trying to get people to not smoke. Patches, electric shock, and all kinds of other things. And very often it fails. This guy just did it by deciding. I had another friend who did something very similar. He had been a lifetime smoker, started smoking when he was a teenager. Now he's in his 30s or so. And one day he just stopped. Poof, just like that. He just stopped. No weaning, no going down to filters or anything. He just stopped smoking. I have another friend who did that. This guy had witnessed an operation on a person who had been a smoker. So they opened this guy up and they showed this guy's lungs. I don't know if this was an autopsy or not. I didn't inquire because I didn't want to intrude. But they opened up the guy's lungs and he said there was a black coating on the entire interior of his lungs. And this guy knew the guy, so he knew he was a smoker. He said when he saw that black coating on the guy's lungs, which would normally be pink, he went right home. He had all of these pipes. He was a pipe smoker that he had collected. Pipes can be quite expensive. So he had hundreds of dollars worth of pipes. He took the whole thing and threw it right in the trash. That was it. So that incident somehow was enough for him. He just decided, I'm not doing this anymore.
It's having the capacity to reshape your agency and dispel tendencies through will, intention, and discipline. An individuated consciousness can self-author previously immutable patterns.
So you see the beauty of it. The beauty of level one is you don't even need to locate it. You have these things in your subconscious, and as you locate them, they delete. That's level two. When you get to will, you don't even have to locate it. You just decide, I'm not doing this anymore, and it's done. That's the ultimate. That's as fast as it's going to be. It's by will.
Jung called it achievement of consciousness over the unconscious processes. In a sense, at level one, I see as pointing towards self-mastery.
Sure. These are gradients towards self-mastery. Even if you're at level 7 and you're re-experiencing an incident and deleting it correspondingly, that is a certain gradient of self-mastery. So you just get better at it and better at it. Obviously, you have to persist to get up to level 1. For example, I would suspect that Jesus of Nazareth could probably delete things at level 1. There's really nothing in the gospel that says that, but just having studied it carefully over a long period of time and knowing how this works, I'm pretty sure he could do that. Or, for example, Siddhartha Gautama, the original Buddha, could probably do that.
Or Yogananda or any of that.
Yes, Yogananda, or maybe even somebody like Moses. It's hard to tell. This is all speculation. But it's not as if it can't be done. It can be done. And once I get to a person who's running it too, I'm looking for him to run at level 1. I might just say, do you think you could just end this by deciding it's ended? Yeah, I can do that. Okay, decide it's ended. It's ended. But most people are not anywhere close to the top of this scale. What's frustrating to me is how hard it is to get people even to get onto level 7. In order to do this, you have to be willing to look at yourself. You have to be willing to re-experience an incident. The reason we live in a world of drug addicts is that people don't want to re-experience things, so they cover it over with the drug. You were just saying before about using OxyContin. The pain is so bad, you want to use the drug to cover it up. As far as I'm concerned, the human race is a race of addicts. Not only the street drugs, you've got alcohol, pharmaceuticals,
shopping.
So there are all these things we do to cover it over. I had a friend recently deceased, a wonderful person, loved this guy. He was a friend of mine from when I was age 4. He died a year or 2 ago. This guy did cocktail time every day. Cocktail time, before dinner, you have a cocktail. That was like his regular practice. He would, 4:30, time for the martinis. And he'd make the martini and he'd have the martini every day. This used to be common practice. It's less so now. He just liked it and kept doing it. By the time this guy got to dinner, he was partly or wholly immersed in a fluid, as my father used to say. If you said to this guy, you an alcoholic? What are you talking about? I'm not an alcoholic. He certainly was dependent upon it. If you go to any person and say, we are taking away all of your drugs, street drugs, pharmaceuticals, alcohol, mushrooms, herbs, they would lynch you, a bunch of them. People are not going to stand for that. This is something that's been going on throughout humankind. The United States tried to solve it with prohibition. It was a catastrophe, didn't work. They had to amend the Constitution in order to get it through. Then they had to amend the Constitution again in order to get rid of it. People went back to drinking. And then drugs became common. Now you have something like 100,000 people a year in America killed by fentanyl alone. This is all because they don't want to re-experiencing it. They don't want to face it. They just say, nope, I'm not going to deal with it. I once had a client I was working with, and this client had a stepfather who she hated. We were doing a session, and somehow this guy's name came up. She went ballistic. She would not talk about this guy. Now, it was patently obvious that this person had electromagnetic standing waves associated with this guy in her subconscious, but she would not look at it. She had such hatred for this guy. She just said, nope, not going to talk about it. Shut up. We'll talk about something else. And we did. We talked about something else. Now, this is a person who had been on cocaine for many years.
We cannot become a complete whole human being by rejecting or ignoring the difficult, the painful, the shameful parts of ourselves. True wholeness comes from integrating all aspects of our psyche, even the parts that seem contrary to our idealized self-image. When we cut off or repress part of our experience and identity, that creates an inner divide, that creates a lack of wholeness.
That's right.
Then we resort to become hypnotized by these addictions.
I'll tell you an actual technique that I used that worked 100% of the time. A person would divulge to me some bad thing they did. In that person's mind, it was a bad thing, but not my judgment. That's not my place. But the person would say, I feel really bad that I cheated on my wife. And I'll say to someone, how did you justify that? They'll say, she was not a good wife and we weren't getting along. So you see, it gets them to say, I'm not a bad person. There was a reason why I did this. Sometimes I'll ask the guy, why did you justify it? And he has no answer. I didn't justify it. And I'll say, why did you do it? I did it because she burns the toast. She yells at the kids. She doesn't bring my clothes home from the cleaners. Blah, 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 blah. See, it's the same thing. So it gets the person to be okay with it. Gets him to say, yeah, I did that. It was a bad thing. And now I see that there were these contributing factors which make it understandable in his own mind. So that relieves the person. It's a good way to get somebody to let go of it. You got to get him to confront that he did something bad. That is greatly aided by the meter. If a person does something bad, it's going to show up on the meter at some point. The specificity of it is what gets it to delete. In other words, I did something bad to my wife. That's not going to delete it. What did you do? What exactly did you do? I had an affair with this other woman. Okay, well, tell me about that. What was the affair? There was a girl, Mary. I was with her for 6 months and we had a hideaway. And he tells me, well, okay, now how did you justify that? And when he justifies, he says, oh, this was justifiable. And that doesn't mean he's shirking. See, he's already taken responsibility because he's admitting he did something bad. Then you ask him, how did you justify it? Why'd you do this? I punched Joe in the nose. Why'd you do that? He insulted my mother. It doesn't mean punching him in the nose was a good thing, but there was a context to it. So that's a really good way to get people to let go of these things and not continue to act them out.
Something that comes to mind in Jung's wisdom, he said, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries.
That sounds vaguely Aristotelian.
Yes. Jim, I want to thank you so much for this incredible scale. I'm getting so much out of this scale. This is a true mind meld. I think you said in your book, and I can see it now after this conversation, you said a whole book can be written just about this scale.
Yes, I could write a book on each one of these scales. I'm not going to do that, but I could.
If we don't elevate our consciousness, we will evaporate. If we stay at that level 7, we will evaporate. We need mastery. We need self-authorship. We need to reclaim the human technology and understand more about what makes this up and how do we use it. What is the practical toolkits that we can use? And I see that Septemics really offers that. So where can people find you, Jim?
I invite your viewers to septemics.com. That's septemics.com, my website where you can see what many readers have said, what many journalists have written. You can read the reviews. You can read sections of the book. There's a whole essay there that explains the subject, and there's a pre-recorded introduction to Septemics that you could listen to that explains the subject to a new person.
Do you have any parting words, Jim?
I just want to say that every person is at some level on every scale. And you can ignore that data if you wish, but you do so at your own peril because it's much smarter to use it.
That's the promise of it. And next week, we will be talking about the scale of aberration. Looking forward to this one. I feel we're really scratching the surface at all of these scales. Even reading through your book, Septemics, it's simple and easy to grasp, but I also see there's a certain profundity to it. It's like a rolling ball of enigma. Jim, I really appreciate your time and your insights. That's been fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome.